Letter 1. Dearest, when I first saw you, I was taken aback by my newfound ability to see through the suffocating blanket of night and find you there, cradling a tiny turtle in your small hand. Michelangelo, you whispered, your long chestnut brown hair swaying gently as you knelt to place the creature onto the lush green carpet of your backyard. A smile bloomed on your face, bright as the midday sun, as you watched it lumber across the grass. For a moment, I was reminded of my own little cat, of a time when I too possessed a childhood as innocent and carefree as yours. From my small window, I bore silent witness to the tapestry of your idyllic upbringing. I saw you take your first wobbly steps on a tiny pink bicycle, your first day of school riddled with nervous excitement, the day you met your first best friend, Brenda. I saw you blossom in middle school, adorned in a crisp new uniform, brimming with youthful charm. I was there when you triumphed at the science fair, clutching your hard-earned trophy shaped like a human cell. You were so full of life, so vibrantly unaware. Time, a relentless sculptor, gradually reshaped you. You grew taller, leaner, your features sharpening into the loveliness of youth. I watched, unseen, as envious eyes followed you from your female peers, as longing gazes lingered from the boys. And I felt a shift within myself, a growing unease. I was older now, weaker, more brittle, and filled with wounds both physical and emotional. The will to escape this dark, suffocating existence had long since abandoned me, leaving only a sliver of solace in the form of my window and the life it framed. I lived vicariously through you, finding joy in the simple rhythm of your days. You never knew it, but you were my savior. You were the single point of light in my ever-darkening world, the anchor that kept me tethered to sanity amidst the horrors of my reality. Then one day, a handsome young man arrived at your doorstep in a shiny red convertible, and my heart ached with a familiar pang. Your mother, her face etched with a worry I knew all too well, eventually conceded, her eyes betraying the painful truth. Some cages are meant to be outgrown. I watch you leave, a vision in a floral dress, as beautiful and fleeting as the summer blooms themselves. That night, you returned late, clutching a worn teddy bear and a half-eaten bag of cotton candy. I pictured you at the carnival, the vibrant chaos of the rides and games, the laughter, and then the kiss. His leaning in, cheeks flushed, the hesitant, awkward sweetness of a first love's touch. I saw it in your face, the rosy glow of an inaugural kiss, and I closed my eyes, imagining the impossible. For a fleeting moment, I wished it were me, adorned in that beautiful dress, radiating that infectious joy, feeling the butterflies erupt in my stomach and the sweet pressure of his lips on mine. But more than anything, I was happy for you. I wanted to thank you. Thank you for giving me life, for allowing me to dream again. I wanted to tell you so many things, but the words caught in my throat, strangled by the fear that has been my constant companion. I couldn't reach out, couldn't fathom a way to bridge the chasm that separated our worlds. If only you knew about my little window, about the eyes that watched over you. And then one day I heard him, the monster I share my existence with, mention you. He had noticed you. I heard him complain about how girls like you shouldn't wear such short skirts. And in that moment, when he mentioned your legs, I knew. I knew you were to be his next victim. I knew I had to protect you, to shield you from the darkness that threatened to consume you too. This was my chance to repay you, to ensure you wouldn't become another me. I was luckier than the others. I don't know why he took such a perverse pleasure in keeping me alive, a macabre trophy to his depravity. Most of the others came and went, never to be seen again. Yet here I remain, years later, still imprisoned by his wickedness. Perhaps it was the flicker of defiance he saw in me, the stubborn ember fueled by you, that kept me breathing. The others, they died long before he ended their physical existence. I saw it in their vacant eyes. They had already surrendered to the abyss. He murdered them in front of me, a gruesome spectacle meant to break me, to revel in his absolute control. But I clung to life, to the fragile hope you represented. I had my little window, my sliver of the outside world, a crack in the damp, dark walls of the basement I called a prison. He hated that he couldn't break me, couldn't extinguish the last vestiges of fight within me. He never knew about the crack, so he kept me alive, a prisoner of his own twisted game, a game I was winning, thanks to you. But then, he noticed you, and I knew what awaited you if he ever laid his filthy hands on you. I gathered every ounce of strength I possessed, fueled by a desperate hope, and I plotted my escape. I want to thank you, because if you are reading this, it means I succeeded. I found the courage, formulated a plan, and made my escape. I let him think I was dead. I don't know if it worked, but if it did, he'll come close to check, and when he does, I'm going to kick him, right in the place it hurts the most, with every ounce of strength I have left. Then I'm going to grab his keys and run, as fast as my battered body will carry me, leaving this letter in your mailbox. I know he'll catch me, because I'm weak, so weak. This body is a roadmap of scars, barely held together by sheer willpower. But if he does, then I've made my peace with that too. I'm not sure anyone will hear me scream or see me. This street is always so quiet, so eerily deserted. You were the only light here, it seemed. But if you get this letter, then I know I did what I had to do, and you'll be safe. Monsters are real. His name is Ryan Morehouse, and he is your neighbor across the street. I have been trapped in his basement for what feels like an eternity. I've lost track of time, but I think I'm in my early 20s now. I was 15 when he took me. My parents, they must be devastated. Please don't tell them about me. I don't want them to know what became of me, to see me like this. Just tell the police about his crimes. He needs to be stopped. He needs to be put away where his darkness can no longer touch anyone else. They'll find the bodies. They're hidden within the walls. I grew accustomed to the stench, the ever-present reminder of his depravity, but they will smell it the moment they step inside. There are so many of us down here. Tell them to be gentle. They were good girls. They were my companions, my only solace in this abyss. But most of all, thank you. You are the reason I made it out. You were my light, and now I run from the darkness, from the monster, because of you. Love, the girl in the window. P.S. We found this letter in our mailbox. After contacting the authorities, our neighbor's house was raided. Over the course of 5 days, a total of 15 bodies were recovered from various hidden spaces within the house. He was planning on taking our daughter next, but thanks to this mysterious stranger, his reign of terror was brought to an end. We have yet to locate the girl who wrote the letter. We can only hope she escaped, but sadly, it's unlikely considering Ryan Morehouse is also still missing. We don't even know her name. but we did find the small crack in the wall where she watched our daughter grow up. Letter 2. Hey there. It's me. It's been a while, hasn't it? Since my last letter, I mean. I saw on the news that you got my letter. Now you know about me. I bet you're dying to know who I am, my real name, my parents' names, where I'm from, what school I went to, what my hopes and dreams are. I don't even know anymore. Maybe you don't care. Maybe I just wish you did. Maybe I just wish someone did. You see, when you're locked away in the darkness for so long, watching as the world outside changes and morphs without you, as people remain oblivious to the blue house, with the man who wears a smile that doesn't reach his eyes, you start to realize that you don't really exist. You start to realize that the world only cares about the salacious details and the horror of a missing teenager. They don't really care about the face on the missing person poster, and that's when you start to float. You float when he talks to you. You float when he hits you. You float when he violates you. You float away. I read somewhere that when people have near-death experiences, many of them report seeing their bodies from above, watching as doctors and nurses frantically try to save them. They float. Apparently, it's the brain's way of dealing with trauma. Something so unfathomable happens that the brain simply shuts down, or at least pretends to, in an effort to keep its host safe. I floated a lot. I floated as I watched horrific things happen to me. I guess that's what happens when you die a little every day. I guess that's what happens when they kill you a little at a time. He was very good at what he did. He knew what to say. He knew how to lure you in. In the blink of an eye, my life was over. I still remember it vividly. His twisted grin, the way he gripped my arm, the feeling of my stomach dropping to my feet. Being kidnapped is a heart-wrenching, soul-crushing transaction between the captor and the captive. It's a moment in time where you realize you've made the biggest mistake of your life. You wish you could take it back, rewind to the moments before everything went dark, before you were stripped of your innocence. But you can't. It's over before you even realize it. And while I always thought I would fight like a wild animal if I were ever in that situation, that I would protect my mind and body at all costs, I didn't. Something in me broke, and I became his prisoner. I became convinced that I deserved it for being so stupid. I spiraled into a vortex of madness that I wouldn't wish on anyone. Now you know what it was like for me. The pain was unbearable. Sometimes, even now, I wonder if I'm still there. If this is all some elaborate hallucination my brain has concocted to give me the life I always wanted. But there's one thing that always brings me back when those intrusive thoughts and the paranoia creep in. Kids grow up. Maybe I was once that naive, easily subdued child. But that couldn't last forever. Eventually, kids grow up. But monsters, they will always be monsters. Ryan Morehouse. It feels strange to think his name and not feel a shiver course down my spine. But that sensation is fleeting, as I realize it was all too real. The pain was real. The girls I met were real. He was real. My escape was real. I lay there, unmoving, not breathing, eyes wide open, mouth agape. As he approached, I could feel my body stiffen in anticipation. But before he could do anything, I floated away. Ironically, he had taught me how to do that. I floated. I soared. I watched from above as his foot connected with my ribs. But this time, even my physical form refused to acknowledge the pain. I can't explain what happened next. Sometimes I think it was a miracle. Everything had to go perfectly. He had to believe I was really gone. I could see the panic in his eyes. It surprised me how careless he had become. He had grown accustomed to my helplessness. But that day, I had a job to do. I had to protect you. I couldn't bear the thought of you ending up like me, trapped in that God-forsaken basement. As he leaned down to check my pulse, I knew it was my moment. He stared into my vacant eyes, desperately searching for any sign of life, and that's when I smiled at him, a slow, deliberate curl of my lips, and watched as his eyes widened in shock before I sank my teeth into his neck. He had never seen me smile before. Perhaps he'd forgotten what it looked like. I never thought I would enjoy the taste of blood so much. As he fell to the ground, clutching his neck and screaming, I rose to my feet. For the first time, I was the one looking down at him. For the first time, he was the one who cowered. I could see the fear in his eyes. He knew it was over. I kicked him in the head until I couldn't recognize him anymore. I didn't feel anything, just emptiness. I drove into the night. I still had faint memories of those driving lessons I took before he stole my life. Driving felt liberating. I drove his truck for hours. I knew I had to ditch the vehicle. The police would be looking for him, for his truck, after they found the letter I left for you. But I didn't want to be found. Not by the police, not by psychiatrists, not by the media, not even my family. I craved anonymity. I craved a life I had never known. I drove to the desert and walked until the sun rose, leaving his broken body in the passenger seat. I watched as the sky transformed into a kaleidoscope of colors. Freedom coursed through my veins like a drug. As the stars began to dot the night sky, I wondered if you had read my letter. I wondered if you felt safe. I wondered if you ever thought about me. But mostly, I missed you. And that worried me. As I reveled in my newfound freedom under the vast expanse of the desert sky, I heard a noise behind me. I turned and locked eyes with him. I quickly turned back around as he let out a hearty laugh, his blood coating his teeth. Now, he looked like a real monster. "You think it's that easy, bitch?" he said, wiping the blood from his mouth with the back of his hand. "And you really thought I was dead?" "I've lived through worse, you fool," I replied, a wry smile spreading across my lips. Monsters are truly foolish creatures. They always forget that even the smallest, most beautiful things can house the most terrifying monsters of all. I pulled the gun from my pocket and shot him. Twice. Once in each leg. He collapsed to the ground, screaming in agony. "I'm not a kid anymore," I said, looking down at him as he writhed in pain. "And I'm not a woman." I paused, my voice changing. "In fact, I don't think I'm even human anymore. I wasn't human. I was something he had created. I was something that couldn't feel things in the same way anymore. I was something that could float. I was something that had learned to embrace the abyss. I was that something, and I had learned to accept it. But I didn't think the world ever would. I won't lie to you. Ryan Morehouse and I, we're still together. Don't worry yourself. It was my choice. I can't help but feel that he's the only one who truly understands me. The only one who could ever understand the twisted, broken thing I've become. The only one who could understand me because I am what he made me. But he knows. He knows it's my turn now. He knows he can't hurt me anymore. He understands that he is mine to control. And he has no choice but to be as helpless and as broken as I once was. And he, too, will learn how to float. I wanted to write this letter to thank you from the bottom of whatever's left of my heart. Thank you for being there for me. Through that small crack, I watched you grow into the beautiful young woman you are today. I watched you shine. It was the only thing that kept me going. Your beauty, your innocence, your kindness, and your intelligence gave me the strength to see another day. It was like watching my favorite television show, and I didn't want to miss an episode. Thank you for being the sliver of hope that helped me survive all those years. I'm so happy you never had to experience the horrors of that basement. I'm happy to see you thriving. I'm happy to know you're no longer afraid of Ryan Morehouse. I'm glad you decided to major in criminal justice. I like how you decorated your dorm room. I like your new haircut, by the way. It really shines when the sunlight hits it just right. You're probably wondering how I know all this. I have a confession to make. I still have my moments, you see. Moments where the panic sets in, and the memories threaten to drown me in my own sweat in the middle of the night. So, I do what I've always done to ease my troubled mind. I still watch you. Last night was particularly bad. One of the worst nightmares I've had since I escaped. I could feel him inside me. The pain was unbearable. So, I did what I had to do. I drove to see you. Seeing you sleeping peacefully calmed me in a way that nothing else could. The steady rhythm of your breathing brought me a sense of peace I've only ever felt when I'm around you. I'm sorry I can't bring myself to see you face to face. I'm not ready to face the world just yet. Ryan Morehouse and I still have some unfinished business to attend to before I can reveal myself. But just know that one day, like all monsters, Ryan Morehouse will get what he deserves. And maybe, just maybe, that's when I'll finally be free. Free to meet you. And maybe then, we can be friends. Maybe then, you can accept me for what I am. Until then, thank you for being there for me when I needed it most. I'll see you soon. Love, the girl who watches you from afar. P.S. It's been 6 months since we received the last letter. It's a bittersweet feeling. We are happy to know that our daughter is safe from that monster, but we are also heartbroken to know that we lived across the street from a house where so many young women were held captive and murdered. More than anything, we pray that we can find the girl who wrote us those letters. While we have received many inquiries, we have been asked by detectives and agents not to share any further information, as this is still an ongoing investigation. Normally, we would honor law enforcement's wishes. However, we feel like we're stuck between a rock and a hard place. We truly believe that people need to know about the monsters that lurk behind seemingly normal houses on seemingly normal streets. This is real. This is terrifying. This is why we've chosen to come forward with our story. When we received the first letter from our daughter's savior, we were beyond grateful. But the second letter left us shaken to our core. Once again, we are left with more questions than answers. Is our daughter being watched by a delusional madwoman? What is the mental state of this stranger? Who is this mysterious girl who watched our daughter grow up? Everyone says I have a child, to the point where I began to believe that I truly did. The other day, a neighbor dropped by and gifted me a pair of children's shoes. Pink shoes, adorned with glittering sequins at the toes and shimmering floral patterns along the sides. We admired them briefly, and I thanked her for the gift. After she left, I threw the shoes into the wardrobe in my bedroom, the place where I'd been piling up all the baby items people had given me over the past 6 months. 6 months ago, the townsfolk started asking about my baby, but I didn't have a child. I had never given birth, never even been pregnant. I thought they had mistaken me for someone else. My appearance wasn't particularly unique. Perhaps a petite woman with black hair and light brown eyes had just had a baby. But being the shy, polite Southerner I am, I was too courteous to say, "You must be mistaken, I don't have a baby." So I just mumbled things like, "Oh, yes," mostly because I was certain this was just a misunderstanding. Then people started giving me baby clothes, cribs, electric swings, toys, shoes, and even diapers. A peculiar situation, no doubt. But then things got even stranger. One day, while I was at the grocery store, the manager, a friendly old man, came up to me. He asked about my sweet little daughter, whether she liked the formula he had once suggested, and if I needed more. I just smiled. When I got home, I found a canister of formula in my bag, and in my kitchen cabinet, I discovered another almost empty one. I didn't even remember buying it. The odd thing was, everyone was so kind to me, and the situation was so surreal that I began to go along with it. "How's your little princess today?" a neighbor asked as I was collecting my mail. "Oh, she's fine. Slept through the night," I replied. Once, a woman I used to have coffee with asked about meeting her 9-month-old daughter and my baby, who was supposedly 5 months old. I dodged the question, but the next time we met, she talked about arranging another play date, saying, "Our little angels had such a great time last time." She even showed me a photo on her phone. "Aren't they adorable? Your daughter has such beautiful blue eyes. That dress really makes them pop. I'll send this picture to you." I looked at the photo and saw a chubby baby in a red shirt and blue shorts. The baby had black hair and black eyes. It was the only child in the picture. At home, I opened the wardrobe in my bedroom, the one filled with baby items. I pulled out all the stuffed animals and an unopened box containing a changing table. I grabbed a shopping bag filled with new baby clothes. I dumped them onto my bed and rummaged through them. I found a pale blue dress. A few weeks ago, I decided to call my mother. "Hello?" she answered. "Mom? It's me," I said. "Oh, Pearl, hello." "How are you?" I asked. We didn't talk often. "I'm fine. Everyone here is fine." She paused briefly, then asked, "How are you and the baby?" "The baby?" I hesitated. "Don't pretend. I know I don't keep in touch often, but I still care about you and my granddaughter," she said, her voice sharp. "I know, Mom." "Oh, she's crying. I have to go," I lied. "Send my love to little Holly," she said before hanging up. The funny thing is, Breakfast at Tiffany's has always been my favorite book since I was little. I always thought Holly would be a great name for a future child of mine. I walked into the room to put my phone down after the short conversation with my mother. The changing table and crib were neatly arranged by the window. But I didn't do that. Surely, I didn't do that. I approached the crib and looked inside. Nothing. I moved closer to the changing table, then stepped back before my shin bumped into its leg. I remembered distinctly bumping into it before. I looked down and saw a bruise on my shin. I knew I had hit the changing table, but I also knew it hadn't been there before. I knew that. "How's Holly today?" the neighbor across the street asked. We were both collecting our mail. "She's fine, still cheerful as ever," I replied. "I heard her screaming when you got home last night. Surprised you managed to calm her down." "Once she falls asleep, she usually stays asleep," I responded. I went inside and sifted through the mail, a stack of junk mail, a few red envelopes. I set it all down on the kitchen counter and opened a cupboard to grab a cup. I heard a noise coming from the bedroom. I stopped and listened. I didn't hear anything for a moment, so I grabbed the cup and filled it with water from the tap. I heard something louder than the running water. Holly must be awake. I walked into the room and looked down at the crib. Holly's stuffed elephant was lying in the crib. I bent down and picked it up. It was so cute. No wonder someone had bought it for Holly. I placed the elephant back in the crib and raised the cup to my lips to take a sip. Suddenly, I realized I was holding a baby bottle. My mind was a mess. But where was my cup? Then I realized I was holding the cup, and I wasn't a mother. What the hell was I thinking? I looked back at the crib. Why was I keeping all this junk in the room? I kicked the crib. Then I kicked it again, and again, until the wood began to splinter. I shoved the changing table over. I opened the wardrobe and shoved all the broken crib pieces and anything baby-related I could find inside. I slammed the door shut. I decided I couldn't keep pretending anymore. I couldn't keep living in this delusion. This morning I went out for coffee. I was exhausted. I felt like I hadn't slept all night. The barista smiled at me. "Your baby keeping you up all night?" she asked. "No," I said curtly. Her smile faded. I sat down to drink my coffee. A woman approached me. She asked how I was, how my daughter was. "I'm fine," I replied, saying nothing more. She sat down at the table and in a concerned tone asked if I was feeling depressed. She said new mothers often feel that way. "I'm not a new mother," I said. A man walked in and quickly approached my table. He leaned down and whispered something into my ear. At first I couldn't make out the words. "What?" I asked. "You left your baby in the car seat outside," he repeated. I shot up, panicked, and ran outside. My heart pounded, guilt and confusion swirling in my chest. How could I have been so careless? How could I leave my child in the car like that? I reached out to unlock the car, flung open the rear door, and looked inside. Empty. No car seat, no Holly. Nothing. I stood there, my heart sinking in my chest. I felt like every eye in the world was on me, judging, condemning. But when I turned around, the street was empty. No one was there. The man who had entered the cafe and reminded me about Holly. He had never existed. No one had. I returned home as silent as a shadow. My entire body trembled, my mind a chaotic mess of unexplainable thoughts. I sat down on the bed, picked up my phone, and opened the photo gallery. I scrolled through the pictures. Images of a chubby baby in a red shirt. The baby with black hair and black eyes. I stared at the photo. Where was Holly? People said there were 2 children in the picture. They said Holly, with her bright blue eyes and pale blue dress, was there too. But I only saw one child. I zoomed in, searching for any sign of her. But no, just one. Where was Holly? I put the phone down, feeling burned by a truth I couldn't grasp. I sat there in silence for a while until I heard crying from the bedroom. Small, weak sobs, but urgent. Holly. I stood up, this time without hesitation, and walked quickly to the room. I opened the door, letting the hallway light spill in. The crib I had destroyed now stood tall in the center of the room, intact without a scratch. The toys, clothes, and even the stuffed elephant were neatly arranged inside. The crying still came from the crib. Trembling, I stepped closer and looked down inside. A small bundle of blankets was moving. I bent down and pulled the blanket back. A tiny face, bright blue eyes staring intently at me. Those eyes were innocent, but deep within them something made my spine go cold. I couldn't look away. "Holly?" I whispered, barely hearing my own voice. The baby stopped crying, but those eyes continued to stare at me unblinking. I lifted Holly. Her body was warm, soft and real, as if everything I had doubted was nothing more than a nightmare. I hugged her tightly, relief washing over me. But then, as I turned around, I found myself standing before the mirror. The reflection didn't look like me. In the mirror, I was holding Holly, but it wasn't the baby with bright blue eyes anymore. The child in my arms had black hair, black eyes, and the same round, chubby face as the one in the photo. I stared at the reflection, and a chilling fear gripped my throat. The Holly in my arms began to stir. I looked down, and her once blue eyes were now pools of inky blackness. A faint smile crept onto her small face, and I felt an icy shiver crawl down my spine. She suddenly let out a soft giggle, an eerie sound that echoed unnaturally through the room. I stumbled backward, my grip loosening until I dropped her back into the crib. When I turned my head to look again, the crib was gone. The room was empty, stripped bare except for a single object, the mirror. I stood there, frozen, staring at my reflection. In the mirror, I was still holding the baby with black eyes. This time, I realized it wasn't Holly. The baby in the reflection smiled at me. It was a smile that didn't belong to this world, a grotesque and sinister twist of its tiny lips. Then it opened its mouth, whispering in a voice that was both faint and deafening at the same time, "Mommy, have you forgotten me?" I woke up in the dark. There were no cries, no giggles. I lay in bed, drenched in sweat, the room so quiet that it felt as though even time itself had stopped. I told myself it had been just a nightmare. But as I turned my head, my breath caught in my throat. The crib stood tall in the corner of the room, its shadow looming ominously. And inside, I saw them, those black, unblinking eyes staring at me from within the darkness. Holly, or whatever it was that Holly had become. The lost dog signs kept appearing in my neighborhood, but the thing in the picture wasn't a dog. I live in a remote spot in the Great Plains, specifically northwest South Dakota. Not the worst place to live if you like corn, but as you can imagine, not much happens here. Not much changes in my quiet world, but when something new emerges from the monotony, I pay attention, like the case with the sign I saw about 3 years ago. It was a Friday night at the end of October, and I was driving home from a party around 10 p.m. I had just reached the loneliest stretch of my drive, a winding forest road with more deer than cars passing by on any given day, when my headlights illuminated a flyer pinned to an elm tree. As I passed, I caught sight of the words, "Lost Dog," along with a picture, presumably, of the mentioned animal. The spot where the flyer was placed was odd enough to make me stop, but from my quick glance, the photo was even stranger. Maybe I was tired after a long day, or perhaps the printer had mangled the flyer, but the picture didn't look like a dog at all. It looked like a random collection of shapes. As I said, not much happens in my town, and the flyer was probably the most interesting thing I had seen all month. There was a turnout just beyond the elm, so I slowed down, pulled over, and stopped. I grabbed the flashlight I always kept in the glove compartment and stepped out to take a closer look. The flyer was even stranger up close. First, there was no contact information, and the reward seemed excessive. The photo was bizarre. Do you remember the AI-generated image shared on Twitter a few years back with the caption, "Name one thing in this photo"? That's what the so-called dog reminded me of, a jumble of colors and shapes that seemed like they should be recognizable but weren't. It had a brief description of the dog below it. John, Shepherd Mix. White fur, brown nose, blue eyes, $10,000, a strange name for a dog. I assumed it was a piece of art, which dispelled some of the unease that had begun to form in me as I stared at the picture. Part of me wanted to take the flyer, but I didn't want to be selfish with the artist's work, so I settled for a photo. Just as I was tucking my phone away, the sound of snapping branches startled me. Maybe the deer wanted to view the art, I thought, shining the flashlight into the forest. I waited a moment, staring into the woods with bated breath. But though it felt like there was an animal right behind me, I saw nothing. I then returned to my car and continued home. The next day, I called my friend Eric, hoping to meet him at our favorite bar. Mid-call, I remembered the picture I had taken of the lost dog flyer and opened my photo library to send it to him. To my disappointment, the photo I took was entirely black. Either I had accidentally covered the lens with my thumb, or the picture had been corrupted. This was a bit strange, but I'm not very tech-savvy, so I assumed it was a glitch and told Eric where to look if he came into town from that direction. Turns out, I didn't have to wait for my next drive out of town to see the flyer again. The following evening, Eric and I were walking back to our cars from the bar. Across the street, plastered to a telephone pole, I saw a familiar flyer and quickly dragged him over to point out the artwork. I grinned as I pointed it out to him, excited that someone was using our town as a canvas for their project, and even more thrilled because I was one of the first to notice it. This flyer was just as informationless as the first and had the same abstract mess of shapes for its dog. Eric, always the more educated of us, having an interest in art history and the like, looked more worried than amused when I turned to gauge his reaction. "What's up?" I asked him. Instead of answering, he just shook his head. "No, you'll think I'm crazy." I tried to persuade him a little more, but realizing he wasn't going to reveal the source of his unease, I let it go. Before I continued to walk towards my car, I pulled out my phone and took a picture of my shoes, which appeared in my photo library without issue. Then I aimed my phone at the flyer, clicked the shutter, and nothing. Again, the photo was completely black. That night, when I got home, I went down a rabbit hole of anti-surveillance patterns, designs created with the intent to confuse cameras and facial recognition technology. Apparently, anti-surveillance fashion had been a big trend in some parts of the world, so it was possible the lost dog artist was using one of those patterns in their work. It explained why I couldn't take a clear picture of the flyer. It didn't explain Eric's reaction. I fell asleep wondering if my friend had seen something I hadn't. Over the next few days, more lost dog signs continued to appear around town, never in high traffic areas or obvious places. I found one behind the bleachers at the community football field, and another hidden behind another flyer on a public notice board. Whoever this artist was, they weren't Banksy. They seemed to prefer setting up an Easter egg hunt over making a bold public statement. The following Saturday, while on a hike, I was surprised to find a "Found Dog" sign taped to a picnic table in a quiet clearing off the main path. I was delighted to see it. I began to think the art project was designed to encourage our town's residents to appreciate their surroundings more, and my attention to detail was being rewarded. Even more satisfying was the fact that this sign had a phone number to call. The sign had no image, just the text, "Found Dog John," along with a phone number. Out of curiosity, I called. After 3 rings, someone picked up. I didn't say anything at first, wondering if I was about to speak with the artists themselves or simply hear some sort of recorded message. After a moment, I heard a very peculiar voice. "Are you looking for the dog?" the voice said. There was some sort of heavy filter on the voice. It sounded distorted and deep, and in a strange way, it reminded me of the growl of a large dog. "Yes, I'm looking for John." "What is the keyword?" the voice asked. "Keyword?" I thought, glancing at the paper in front of me and trying to recall the exact wording of the lost dog flyer. Maybe there was a keyword I missed. Shepherd mix, I guessed, and the person on the other end hung up. I tried calling back, but they didn't answer again. I put away my phone, disappointed, and sat down on the picnic table. The sun began to set, and a cool breeze started blowing from the north, whistling as it threaded through the tree branches. I lowered my gaze from the pink and orange sky, staring at the woods in the distance. There was an animal peering out from the bushes. It was hard to pinpoint exactly what it was from such a distance, but it looked like a coyote, which my state had no shortage of. It stood motionless in an eerie way. I raised my hand slightly and waved at the creature as a joke to myself, and then the thing stood up on two legs. I realized it wasn't an animal, but a person, dressed in black from head to toe and wearing a dog mask on their face. The person turned their back to me and walked deeper into the woods. Needless to say, it wasn't a pleasant sight to witness. I left quickly afterward, half running, half walking towards my car, glancing back over my shoulder every few minutes. If I had seen someone wearing a dog mask wandering the woods a week ago, I would have laughed. I would have assumed they were some kind of role player, as rare as such people might be in rural South Dakota. However, after that strange phone call, the sight seemed more threatening than funny. Was that the person I had just spoken to on the phone? If so, were they really just standing there waiting for someone to see their found dog flyer? The next day, as I made my rounds to familiar places over the weekend, I noticed that the lost dog signs had been torn down. I guess the art project had concluded, although it seemed to have run for an unusually short time. I felt disappointed that nothing more came from it, and that I would never get answers about who was behind the flyers, but I might have moved on with my life and forgotten about it all if not for the visitor I received that night. It was around midnight. I was sitting at my computer, playing video games and trying not to think about work in the morning when I received a message from Eric. Oddly, he asked if he could come over, and it was such an unusual request that I thought something was wrong. I agreed, and he showed up at my door 20 minutes later. He looked terrible, hair disheveled, eyes bloodshot, and his entire demeanor anxious and jittery. As he entered my house, he held a phone in one hand and a rolled-up piece of paper in the other. "You won't believe me. You'll think I'm going insane," he said after declining both a drink and a seat on my couch. I assured him that he could trust me, that I would take his words seriously. After a moment, he unfurled the rolled paper in his hand to reveal one of the lost dog flyers. "This is me," he said, taking me by surprise. "What? Did you make these flyers?" "No." He pointed to the picture in the center of the flyer. "This is a picture of me." I looked back and forth between his face and the flyer. I squinted. I relaxed my eyes. I looked at the picture from different angles. No matter what I did, the so-called dog in question didn't resemble a human, let alone the familiar face of my friend. I chuckled, probably quite awkwardly. "All right, you got me. Very funny." Instead of breaking character and laughing with me, Eric unlocked his phone and opened Instagram. Once in the app, he navigated to his profile and clicked on his most recent post, a selfie from last year. He held the phone up next to the flyer. It's hard to see, but I swear this is me. This is my last photo with a filter to break it down into shapes. You see this white part, circle and rectangle beneath it? That's my face and neck. And these dots, These little blue dots here and here, those are the eyes. And the brown part up here is the hair. I swear, I thought I was going insane, but everything matches. I took the flyer and phone from his hand and tried to match the shapes. Maybe it was the power of suggestion, but the more I looked between them, the more I began to see a resemblance. Also, he continued, ever since you showed me that flyer, I've been hearing all kinds of weird noises. Outside my house at night, I keep hearing sounds like, I don't know, an animal or something. I thought a family of raccoons moved in, but it doesn't sound like raccoons. Have you checked for tracks? Yeah, but you know we have a green lawn right up to the porch. I see the indentations but can't see any tracks. Eric shook his head. Last night, I swear I heard people talking, but I can't tell you what was said. Maybe these flyers have just freaked me out. I recalled the person I had seen during the hike. Whether or not it was truly an edited photo of Eric in those flyers, something strange was clearly happening in our town. I quickly began to regret wishing for a little more excitement. I'll tell you what, I said. I have a few spare surveillance cameras. How about this? Tomorrow morning on my way to work, I'll swing by and set a few up for you. I want to get to the bottom of this too. Eric accepted my offer and left my house looking a bit more at ease than when he arrived. Just for fun, before going to bed, I tried calling the number on the found dog flyer again. This time, I received a blocked message saying that the phone number had been disconnected or was no longer in service. The next morning, I went to Eric's house as planned. I rang the doorbell and waited. When he didn't answer, I tried knocking instead. Still no answer. I waited a total of 10 minutes outside his front door, knocking and sending him a few messages. I didn't panic immediately, because my friend was notoriously known for sleeping in and being late. I left him a voicemail saying that I had to head to work, but would stop by to check on him in the evening. It wasn't until I finished the workday and saw that my messages were still unread that I began to worry. I called his neighbor and asked if she had seen him, and when she said no, I asked her to check on Eric. Fortunately, she had a spare key, and so I went with her to Eric's house. We didn't find Eric inside, nor did we find signs of a struggle, but we found everything else. Keys, wallet, phone, even his shoes. It was that discovery that made me realize I had to get the authorities involved. Although I had never spoken to the police in all my years living here, I drove to the station and reported my friend missing. It's been 3 years since Eric disappeared. In all this time, I haven't received any news from him, nor have the police been able to find any leads. I'm not sure whether to feel relieved or sad. On one hand, I'm grateful for the ambiguity. Who knows? Maybe Eric ran off to the Bahamas with a beautiful woman and is living out his days happily on a beach as we speak. On the other hand, the events leading up to his disappearance seem to indicate something darker. Eric was a good friend of mine, and, beyond that, a good man. And I pray that wherever he is, he's okay. The years passed in the blink of an eye. This town has always been oppressively dull, even more so now that the only person who could beat me at billiards has vanished from the face of the earth. Not much changes in my quiet world, but when something new emerges from the monotony, I pay attention, like the case of the sign I saw last night. It was early morning, and I was on the old forest road back to town from a friend's party. Still the emptiness, still the familiar stretch of road. Perhaps it was the same elm tree. In any case, as I drove in silence, a lost dog sign caught my attention. Pinned to a tree at the edge of the road, it read, John, Shepherd Mix, white fur, brown nose, brown eyes, $10,000. Beneath the words was a picture. Though abstract and blocky, I couldn't help but notice a striking similarity between it and the last photo of myself that I had posted online. My husband urged me to let my sister be the surrogate for our child, but in the traditional way. I stood in the kitchen, eyes staring out the window, my mind drifting to distant places. I couldn't bear the tension in my chest and the weight of what my husband had proposed. David and I had been trying to have a child for years, but a recent hospital visit had nailed the coffin shut when they said it would never happen. I had crumbled, but David didn't seem too broken up about it, claiming we had options. I couldn't believe what he was asking, not just of me, but of my sister. When he first mentioned having my sister be the surrogate, it didn't seem like the worst idea. But when he suggested doing it the traditional way, my blood ran cold. A million thoughts raced through my mind as I tried to comprehend what he was saying and wanting. Had he been attracted to my sister all along? Was this his way to sleep with her without guilt? I was furious, and when I confronted him, he saw no issue. He said his ancestors had done it this way for centuries. I didn't respond immediately. I didn't think I could speak without breaking down. It was as if David, the man I had known and loved, had suddenly become a stranger. It wasn't just the idea of surrogacy that disturbed me. It was the way he talked about it, as if it were part of some long-lost tradition. He wasn't discussing clinics or doctors. He wanted Emily to conceive with him naturally. I couldn't wrap my mind around it. My sister, with my husband, to give us a child I couldn't have? The thought made me nauseous. David was calm, almost too calm as he explained. He said it was the family way, something his ancestors always did to keep the bloodline strong. The more he talked, the more I felt like I didn't know him anymore. It wasn't just archaic, it was terrifying. I tried talking to Emily, hoping she'd be as horrified as I was. At first she thought it was a joke, but when I told her how serious David was, her face changed. She admitted he had talked to her about it. She hoped he'd drop the idea if I disagreed. Now we both knew it wasn't going away. Anger burned within me. How could David suggest this? The thought of him with Emily was unbearable. There was something more, something dark, lurking beneath his words. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his plan than just having a child. I began to dig. I rummaged through his things, searching for anything that could explain what was happening. That's when I found the old family records. At first, it seemed like harmless genealogy. But the deeper I delved, the stranger it became. There were symbols I didn't recognize, notes on bloodlines and fertility. And then I found what made my skin crawl. Mentions of rituals, sacrifices, and offerings to some ancient god. Suddenly, everything became clear. This wasn't just about having a child. David wasn't just trying to maintain the family bloodline. He was planning something much darker. My sister wasn't just meant to be a surrogate. She was meant to be a sacrifice, an offering to the ancient god his family had worshipped for generations. I felt sick. My mind raced as I pieced it all together. David had been planning this for years. His calm demeanor, his talk of tradition, was a facade for something far more sinister. I realized I wasn't just fighting to stop an uncomfortable surrogacy agreement. I was fighting for my sister's life. When I confronted him, he didn't deny it. He just looked at me with that eerie calmness, saying it was the only way to ensure the family's future. Emily had to be the one. She was perfect for the ritual. He spoke as if it was decided, as if I had no say in it. Desperation turned into panic, a gnawing fear consuming me. I had to protect Emily, but I wasn't sure how obsessed David was with all of this, or how far he would go to see it through. Time was running out, and I knew if I didn't stop him, I'd lose Emily. And if that happened, the consequences would be worse than anything I could imagine. The night of the ritual arrived. David had prepared everything, symbols drawn on the floor, candles flickering in strange, unnatural shapes. Emily stood by, trembling, terrified of what was to come. I trembled too, but not from fear. I was ready. David didn't know how much I had learned, how far I had gone to turn the tables. He thought I was defeated, that I had accepted his plan. He didn't know that while he was busy obsessing over his precious ancient ways, I had found something older, more powerful. As David began the chant, my heart pounded in my chest, but I remained silent, watching him call upon forces he didn't fully understand. He moved toward Emily, ready to start the final part of the ritual, but that's when I acted. I spoke the words he hadn't expected, words I had learned from the darkest parts of those ancient texts. They weren't meant for me to speak, but I had learned how to twist the ritual, bend it to my will. I had spent weeks preparing for this moment, memorizing everything I needed to ensure he would be the one to pay the price. David froze as the energy in the room shifted. The symbols on the floor shimmered, changing shape, twisting into something he didn't recognize either. His confidence wavered, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. He tried to complete the chant, but the words fell apart. "You don't understand what you're doing," he tried to shout. His control over the ritual was slipping. The power he had summoned cared not for tradition or purity. It sought only one thing, the perfect vessel. David gasped, his face contorting in shock. The ritual had changed, and he was no longer its master. He tried to stand, but his body convulsed, and he fell to his knees. His hands clutched at his stomach as something inside began to swell, pushing outward. The horrifying realization dawned on him. The life he intended for my sister now grew within him. I watched as his belly swelled, the skin stretching tight. Its weight grew, heavy and undeniable. He looked up at me, face pale, desperately seeking escape, but there was none. The magic had chosen. David, who had been obsessed with controlling his bloodline, was now the one carrying it. The look of horror on his face was all I needed to know he understood, and there was no way out. He was pregnant. 9 months later, David was but a shadow of the man he once was. His once proud posture had crumbled under the weight of the massive, swollen belly, the skin stretched taut and marred with deep stretch marks. His feet were perpetually swollen, and his face, once stern, now sagged and weary from sleepless nights of cramps, backaches, and the relentless discomfort of carrying life within. He had experienced every stage of pregnancy. The morning sickness leaving him retching, strange cravings, and the unpredictable mood swings that left him either sobbing or furious over the smallest things. His body ached in ways he had never imagined. His back hunched as he shuffled around the house, barely able to move under the burden he had brought upon himself. The reality of pregnancy had shattered any remaining trace of arrogance within him, leaving him humble and broken. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you found this story as chilling as it was captivating. If you'd like to hear more spine-tingling tales like this, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Stay spooky.